The first thing you notice isn't the scream, it's the click, a sharp, metallic snap that cuts through the early morning haze, silencing the birds mid-song. It's the unmistakable sound of a bargain bin safety being switched off on an even cheaper pistol. Then comes the screamish shrill, desperate cry from a man who's clearly in over his head. That man wasn't my son. My son, Jake, was already down and out flat, not flailing, just lowered onto one knee, hands calmly raised in a way that radiated pure, irritating composure, like a knight awaiting a ceremonial sword tap. The one doing the screaming and waving the gun around? That was Barry the Barracuda Barriston, head honcho of our subdivision's newly formed Community Standards Enforcement crew. He wore tight black polo shirts straining at the seams and a tactical vest decked out with more empty pouches than purpose. He looked like someone tried to make a police officer out of leftover party balloons. But the gun in his jittery grip, that was very real. In the distance, police sirens started wailing a sweet music of justice on its way. Yep, that was my boy. And the sweaty man threatening him? Well, he was about to star in the worst day of his life, because what Barry didn't know, what nobody in our rapidly homogenizing neighborhood knew, was that my quiet 21-year-old son spent his workdays teaching elite U.S. soldiers how to avoid getting shot. Jake trained Navy SEALs. And Barry, armed with his catalog-ordered authority and quaking trigger finger, had just enrolled himself as the lead example in Jake's next workshop on how not to escalate a moron. But let's rewind. Let's go back to where it all really began, in the grass. We live on the edge of a fresh development, one of those master-planned suburban sprawls that popped up on old farmland like mushrooms after a thunderstorm. Our property's older 10 acres, gravel drive, sturdy brick house built by my grandfather, and a barn with more stories than the entire hoe board could make up in a year. We were here first. Our deed was recorded when the road was still dirt and the nearest neighbor was a mile away. When the Whispering Pines subdivision emerged, we were grandfathered in a little patch of rural common sense floating in a sea of beige vinyl and identical mailboxes. Or so I believed. The first letter was almost laughable. A crisp envelope adorned with the Whispering Pines logo, an oddly grenade-shaped pine cone. Inside was a violation notice. Failure to maintain grass height in compliance with Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph 100. They were talking about my hayfield. They wanted me to cut it down to 3 inches. I used it to feed my 3 cows. It was like citing the ocean for being too damp. So, I tossed it. If you've ever dealt with a clipboard-wielding tyrant, you know the first letter is just the opening salvo. Like and share if you've been there. The second violation was for an unapproved commercial vehicle, my personal F-250 pickup. It hauls feed, sometimes my boat. But in their eyes, anything that hinted at actual utility was apparently a threat to home values. I used that notice to soak up a minor oil spill in my shop. The third notice was about our sign. At the end of our half-mile drive, where it meets the road, stands a wooden sign my father painted 3 decades ago, 4 feet by 4 feet. White with bold black letters, private property, no trespassing. Sure, it's weathered and worn, but it does the job. The hoe called it non-compliant and demanded we replace it with one of their pre-approved 12-inch bronze plaques. You couldn't even read one of those driving past, much less with a point to it. That one, I burned. My wife, Sarah, is a saint. She always said, "Honey, just call Thema, it's easier than pushing back." But it's not in my nature to submit to petty authority. This wasn't about lawns or trucks. This was about power. They wanted to plant their flag. And my land, that was the battlefield. Our first face-to-face happened on a Tuesday. I was out fixing a fence post when this absurd little golf cart, is something that looked like it escaped from a low-budget sci-fi movie, came rolling to a halt at the end of the drive, flashing amber lights, and a decal reading Community Standards Enforcement plastered across the side. Out stepped Barry Barriston. The man was built like a sun-warmed sack of potatoes, short, soft, and red-faced with a default setting of outrage. At his side was his ever-present shadow, a lanky kid we dubbed Rent-a-Randy, who looked like he was one pyramid scheme away from joining a doomsday cult. Barry clutched the sacred artifact of his office, a clipboard. He studied it like a surgeon reviewing a grim prognosis. "Sir," he began, dripping with a manufactured command, We've issued 3 notices regarding multiple violations of community regulations. I leaned on my shovel. Barry, we've danced this dance. My land isn't under your HOA fiefdom. My deed predates your entire existence. Unless you've got a court order, you're skirting real close to trespassing. Might be time to back the thing up. He puffed up like a toad. You could practically see the aura of entitlement settle around him. The first 10 feet of any property bordering a community road is designated as a beautification and utility easement under HOA oversight. He rattled off, glazed eyes gleaming with devotion to the rulebook. It's a classic move. They bury you in jargon, hoping you don't know the law. Like an octopus clouding the water with ink, it's messy and meant to confuse. It was all misdirection, deliberately confusing to give them an escape hatch. In plain terms, Barry was claiming that the first 10 feet of my land somehow belonged to him. I just smiled. See, I'd already looped in my cousin. He's a lawyer, and these kinds of petty property skirmishes are his idea of weekend fun. He pulled the county plat records for me. That's interesting, I said, strolling toward Barry while holding up my phone, because according to the official county survey, the HOA's easement stops at the property line for lot 217. I tapped the screen. That's next door. My lot, no easements, nothing. You're currently standing on a public road. One more step, and you'll be on private property, and then we'll be having a very different chat, with very different people. I pointed to my worn, weather-beaten non-compliant sign. That still applies to you. Rent-a-cop. Randy shuffled backward. Barry's face flushed from angry red to a disturbing shade of purple. The clipboard in his hand shook like a leaf in a thunderstorm. Everything he believed about his power, his whole identity, really was built on a brittle framework of overreaching regulations. And I had just knocked out the support beam. He couldn't compute it. He just stammered, "This will be recorded in your file. Consider this an official warning." With that, he and Randy clambered back into their little golf cart of imagined justice and sped off, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and badly bruised ego. I went back to working on the fence post. I knew this wasn't over. This was just the opening move in a fight I hadn't asked for, but one I had every intention of winning. That's when things escalated. The letters stopped for a few days. Silence, a lull I recognized as strategic. Men like Barry don't slink off when challenged. They regroup, rearm, and look for the next pressure point. His next approach, about 200 feet above ground. Welcome to what my wife Sarah grimly dubbed the drone war. It kicked off on a quiet Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on the back porch when I heard that high-pitched mechanical whine, like an oversized robotic mosquito. I looked up and spotted a little white drone, hovering just over the edge of my property line. Its camera gimbal shifted, scanning my barn, my workshop, and of course, my allegedly offensive F-250. Barry couldn't trespass physically, so now he was invading my airspace. It felt dirty, creepy, violating, like a metal buzzard circling for something to report. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. It was personal, targeted, a harassment campaign from a man whose sense of power was slipping. I called my lawyer cousin again. He let out a long sigh. "Can you prove it's his drone?" he asked. "And is it directly over your house, or just skimming the field?" The legal waters were murky, caught between outdated FAIR rules and local statutes still trying to keep up with technology. But the intent? That was unmistakable. Intimidation. I weighed my options. I considered a rock. I considered a shotgun. Then my backup arrived. Jake came home. My son rolled in for a couple weeks of downtime, pulling up in his beat-up old truck, looking every bit the laid-back 21-year-old on break from college. He's quiet, watchful, doesn't say much about his job. For years, all we really knew was that he worked as a contractor with the Department of Defense. He downplayed called it advanced team building. But Sarah and I knew better. We just didn't push. He'd been home barely 2 hours when that mosquito buzz returned. We were out in the yard, tossing a ball for the dog. Jake froze mid-throw. He tilted his head, scanning the sky, eyes narrowing. He locked onto the drone and tracked it silently, watching as it zigzagged along the tree line, its camera twitching like a nervous eye. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in his expression, as something cool, tactical, and razor sharp. A glimpse of the professional behind the quiet kid I knew. "He's flying a pattern," Jake said, voice even. "And a sloppy one, too." "Who is it?" he asked. I gave him the full backstory, every ridiculous detail: the lawn complaint, the truck issue, the sign, the walking rulebook named Barry. Jake listened carefully, nodding. When I finished, he simply said, "Okay, we'll take care of it." He didn't talk about retaliation, he didn't mention breaking anything. What he proposed was far more strategic. "Technology isn't the problem," Jake said. "We'll just use better tech to document his incompetence." That night, we drove into the city. Jake had a plan. Jake didn't take me to a chain electronics store. He took me to a specialist shop, one of those places that sells gear to people who know exactly what they're looking for. He bypassed the standard home security kits entirely, pointing out specific camera models while talking about things like low light performance, optical zoom ranges, and encrypted data storage. We walked out with 4 high-resolution 4K security cameras and a terabyte DVR drive. Jake spent the next day on a ladder, installing each one with precision. One camera covered the driveway and captured every vehicle or visitor coming and going. Another kept an eye on the front yard and porch. A third watched over the barn and workshop. And the fourth, a pan-tilt zoom modular, was mounted high on a pole, scanning the sky. "It's not about catching him," Jake explained while setting up the system on my desktop. "It's about proving what we didn't do. We're documenting our own space. If his drone ever malfunctions and crashes, we'll have 4 angles showing exactly what happened." We weren't just defending ourselves, we were building a digital fortress, brick by brick. It was brilliant. Barry's favorite weapon, surveillance, was now working against him. With our cameras rolling, I decided it was time to go on the offensive. I paid a visit to Old Man Hemlock, who lived just past the new development. His family had sold the land that became Whispering Pines, but he kept his own 10-acre untouched and free. He was in his 80s, sharp as ever, and had a long-standing disdain for homeowner associations. When I told him what Barry was up to, he let out a wheezy laugh. "That Barry guy?" he said. "He came by once and told me my roses were an unauthorized floral display." I told him where he could stick his clipboard. Then Hemlock went into his closet and came back with a dusty old tube. Inside, a copy of the original land grant from the 1950s and the developer's sale agreement. We spent an hour combing through it. He confirmed what my cousin had said: my property was explicitly excluded from all HOA covenants. Even better, he remembered the developer, a slick operator who cut corners and rushed the paperwork. Turns out the HOA had been cobbled together hastily, using bylaws copied straight from a generic Florida condo complex. That explained the 3-inch grass rule. The whole thing was a legal house of cards. Hemlock became my historian in residence, a living archive of Whispering Pines' dubious origins. And then, it happened. It was late afternoon, a drone o'clock. I was working in the shop. Jake was reading on the porch. Sarah was inside, cooking dinner. The familiar buzzing sound returned, but then, it changed. A sputter, a hiccup, silence, then a thump. The drone went down about 50 yards from my workshop. Jake didn't even look up. "Huh," he said, casually turning a page. "Guess he lost signal." An hour later, Barry and Randy came racing down the road in their golf cart of doom. They parked, jumped out, and began pacing back and forth along the edge of my field, peering desperately into the tall grass where their toy had crash-landed. Barry was frantic, shouting into his phone, probably calling the HOA board, pointing at my house, pointing at the sky, trying to spin a story. I had shot it down. I had destroyed HOA property. But he had a problem. To retrieve the drone, he'd have to trespass, and he knew I was watching. I let him stew for a while, about 30 minutes. Then I walked out, didn't say a word, just leaned against a fence post, arms crossed, watching him. Eventually, he snapped. "You did this?" he shrieked. "You shot down my drone. That's a federal crime." "Did I?" I asked calmly. "I've been in my workshop all afternoon. Lucky for me, I just installed a new security system, records everything. If you'd like, I can check the footage." Then I smiled. "But if you want to retrieve your drone, you'll need permission to step onto my property. Or you can call the sheriff and have them ask for you." His face fell. The trap had closed. If he called the authorities, I'd hand over video proof showing I hadn't laid a finger on his drone and that his drone had been trespassing. I'd likely file a counterclaim for illegal surveillance. If he didn't call, his precious gadget would sit in my field indefinitely, out of reach. He chose to retreat, but anger got the better of him. As he climbed back into his cart with Randy, they both stepped a few feet past the property line right in front of the very sign they hated. What they didn't notice was the little security camera on the corner of the barn, silently recording their every step. That night, I burned the footage onto a DVD. The next morning, my cousin sent a certified letter to Barry and the entire HOA board. It included a screenshot from the video, a formal notice of trespassing, and a clear reservation of our right to pursue legal action. He also included a bill for 1 hour of legal consultation. The drone war was over. We had won. We'd won the drone battle, but Barry's obsession was only deepening. His harassment evolved from passive-aggressive paperwork to full-on personal vendetta. The golf cart patrols became more frequent, more erratic. He wasn't just cruising by anymore, he was staking out our property like some kind of low-budget vigilante. He'd park his ridiculous little chariot of justice just outside our fence line, sometimes sitting there for over an hour with the roof lights flashing for no discernible reason. At night, he'd sweep a high-powered spotlight across our windows like he was raiding a meth lab instead of glaring at a house in the suburbs. It was textbook intimidation allowed, petty, and ultimately, self-defeating, because every minute of it was being recorded by Jake's camera system. We were building an archive, not just of his actions, but of his unraveling. That's when Sarah stepped in. My wife is a data analyst for a logistics company. She's fluent and also able to make sense of endless, tangled data streams. Where I was focused on protecting our property, she was launching a quiet, methodical counteroffensive from her home office. "Aggression is a symptom," she said one night, eyes reflecting the glow of her triple monitor setup. "Let's find the disease." She began pulling every public document tied to the Whispering Pines HOA articles of incorporation, meeting minutes, financial reports. Then she cross-referenced it all with state business records. That's when she found Barracuda Security Services LLC. It was beautiful, a masterpiece of small-time corruption. First, according to the state licensing board, Barracuda was only certified for unarmed observation. Legally, they weren't allowed to carry weapons or present themselves as law enforcement. Barry's whole tactical vest-wearing, badge-wielding cosplay was a complete fabrication of something he'd sold to the HOA board with bluster and a straight face. Second, the money trail. Sarah mapped out the HOA's expenditures and built a flowchart. It showed Barracuda was being paid an absurd monthly fee well beyond the market rate for the services of 2 guys in a golf cart. It was the single largest line item in the budget, larger than landscaping, larger than maintenance. And the kicker? The contract had been signed by the HOA president to Barry's brother-in-law. It was textbook grift, fear-mongering for profit, hidden in plain sight. Then, out of nowhere, came an unexpected an anonymous email from a burner account. "I'm on the HOA board. I'm sorry, we never approved armed patrols." Barry told us there was a spike in local crime. He showed charts, statistics. He scared the older residents. We didn't know what we were signing. Now we feel trapped. The sender was Carol, a new board member clearly terrified of Barry, but driven by conscience. She became our inside source. Jake set up a secure messaging app for her. Over the next few weeks, she started leaking documents, internal emails, contract drafts, board discussions, and growing evidence that the rest of the board was losing faith in Barry. They had built a monster and now it was turning on them. We had everything lined up: legal grounds for trespassing, video evidence of harassment, a financial scandal connecting Barry directly to HOA funds. All we needed now was one final, undeniable image to tie it all together, proof that Barry was illegally acting as an armed enforcer. That's when Jake stepped forward. He'd been quietly reviewing security footage and not just watching it, but analyzing it like a pattern. "He's predictable," Jake said, pointing to the DVR timeline one night. "He always shows up between 4:45 and 5:15 a.m. That's his sweet spot. Everyone's asleep. He gets to play cop when no one's watching." Then he turned to me. "Calm. Serious. I'm going for a run tomorrow morning. My heart dropped. Jake, number. That's crazy. He's unstable. Jake met my eyes, voice steady. Dad, he said, like he was explaining to someone who didn't quite get it. This is how we finish shit. This isn't escalation, Jake said calmly. It's a controlled environment. We're setting the stage for him to reveal exactly who he is. He had the plan laid out. At 5 a.m., Jake would go for a run and nothing unusual, just a young man jogging down his own driveway, wearing a plain gray hoodie and sweatpants. No phone, no weapon, nothing remotely suspicious unless you were Barry, armed with paranoia and a savior complex. Barry wouldn't be able to resist. A shadowy figure at dawn, it would trigger every delusion he had about being the lone protector of Whispering Pines. Your job, Jake told me, is to watch from the front window. The driveway camera's audio is sensitive. As soon as he engages me, just observe. If he draws a weapon, call 911, the real 911. Report an armed man who is not law enforcement threatening someone on your property. Stay calm. Be a good witness. I was terrified, but when I looked at Jake, I didn't see fear, only precision. He wasn't being reckless. He was meticulous, calculating. This wasn't a stunt, it was strategy. And he was using Barry's ego as the bait. The plan was bold, terrifying, but it was airtight. The trap was set, and Barry was already swimming toward it. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at the blinking red light on the DVR, quiet pulse counting down to whatever would happen next. By 4:30 a.m., the house was still. But I knew it was coming. There was no turning back. At 4:55, Jake came downstairs, gray sweats, hood up, silent. He gave me a single nod and slipped out the front door into the dawn. I took my place at the front window, phone in one hand, my tablet in the other. Live feeds from every camera around the driveway, angles layered like a surveillance thriller. At exactly 5:03 a.m., headlights. Barry's golf cart eased to a stop at the end of our drive. No siren, no announcement, just the silent hum of entitlement. He killed the engine, then, nothing. Until the driver's door opened. Barry stepped out, followed by his ever-present sidekick Randy, the embodiment of reluctant complicity. They stood there, silhouetted by the pale morning sky, exactly as Jake had predicted. On the screen, I watched Jake approach the end of the driveway. He saw them. He didn't pause. He didn't react. He simply turned and jogged back toward the house. That was the trigger. To Barry, this wasn't a resident finishing a jog. This was a suspect fleeing the scene. Freeze. Barry barked. Community security. Hands where I can see them. Jake stopped immediately. He turned, slow and deliberate, and raised his hands to shoulder height. From the window, I could just make out the faintest smile on his face. He wasn't nervous. He was in control. Am I being detained? Jake asked, voice even. What's the charge, officer? The way he said officer, a casual, deliberate how was like a pin to Barry's overinflated ego. You are on private community property, Barry roared, stepping onto our driveway. Randy hung back, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. This isn't community property, Jake said, still calm. This is my father's land. This is our driveway. You're trespassing. Then came the line I knew would crack him. And you're not an officer. It shattered Barry's fantasy. In that moment, he wasn't some hero defending the Gatessa. He was just a middle-aged man in a golf cart being called out by a kid who knew the law better than he did. He snapped. His hand flew to his hip. We heard it clearly in the click of a safety being disengaged. He drew the pistol, a cheap, silver-plated, theatrical, and leveled it at my son's chest. I have authority to protect this community from threats. He screamed, voice high, cracking under the pressure. Get on the ground. Now. The instant the gun came out, I was already dialing. Before the operator finished the first sentence, I was reporting an armed man on our property, a man with no badge, pointing a loaded weapon at my son. Barry didn't even get to finish his sentence. My voice came out steady, eerily calm, just like Jake had coached me. I need to report an armed man on my property, I said. He is not a police officer. He's drawn a weapon and is pointing it at my son. The address is 1412 Old County Road. White male, heavy set, black polo shirt, driving a golf cart with yellow lights. The dispatcher didn't flinch. "Sir, are you and your son safe?" "My son is being held at gunpoint," I replied. "I'm inside the house, watching. Please send help immediately. Units are en route." "Stay on the line." Outside, Jake was calm exactly as he planned. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, then sat on the gravel, hands visible. He was diffusing the situation while waiting for trained professionals to step in. He wasn't scared. He was managing the threat. 2 minutes later, 2 agonizing minutes as the sirens arrived. Not one cruiser, 3. The driveway exploded in red and blue lights. Deputy Tom was the first out, an old friend, a slow-moving man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene instantly. Barry, sweat-soaked and wide-eyed, aiming a gun at a seated young man. Tom's hand went to his holster. "Barry, drop the weapon, now." His voice cut through the madness like a thunderclap. Real authority, unmistakable. Barry froze. He looked at Tom, then at his own cheap pistol as if seeing it for the first time. His hand shook. He dropped it. 2 deputies moved in, cuffing Barry as he sputtered and twitched like a short-circuited appliance. I walked out, tablet in hand. "Tom," I said, "it's all on here." I handed him the footage. The crisp 4K video told the entire story. Jake jogging, Barry blocking the driveway, the verbal confrontation, the drawn weapon. Tom watched, his face darkening with every frame. "Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon," he muttered. "Brandishing, false imprisonment." "Lord Almighty, Barry." Just then, a sleek black SUV slid silently onto the scene. No sirens, government plates. It simply appeared. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, a close-cropped hair, crisp shoes. He walked past the local cops like they weren't even there, flashed a badge to Tom, and said, "We'll take it from here." He nodded toward Jake. "We're here for him." Barry, being led to the cruiser, stopped in his tracks. The blood drained from his face. The man in the suit turned to Jake, who was now brushing gravel from his pants. "Your ride's here, sir," he said. "Hope we didn't interrupt your vacation." Jake grinned. "Just a little community outreach, Mark." "All good." Barry's brain tried to catch up. "Whoa, who is he?" he stammered, eyes darting from Jake to the man in the suit. Mark turned to Barry with the kind of look that chills the air around it. Not angry, just done. Cold. "Absolute." "The young man you just threatened?" he said quietly. "He's a civilian contractor for Naval Special Warfare. He trains Tier 1 as it's a Navy SEALs on how to handle hostile encounters. He teaches them how to assess use of force scenarios." He let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, with clinical finality, "Congratulations, Mr. Baristan. You just became a case study in his next training module. The chapter is called, 'How to Identify and Neutralize an Untrained, Egotistical Hostile with a Hero Complex.'" The only sound after that was the click of the handcuffs being double-locked. Barry's jaw slackened. You could see the moment it hit him that he just pulled a gun on someone who teaches America's most elite warriors how to handle guys exactly like him. The aftermath wasn't a single moment, it was a tidal wave. Barry Baristan and the entire rotten structure of the Whispering Pines HOA were washed away in slow, spectacular fashion. He faced a slew of felonies, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, unlawful brandishing. And that was just the beginning. When Deputy Tom ran the serial number on Barry's pistol, a cheap silver Taurus, it came back unregistered. Add illegal possession of a firearm to the stack. The feds, Mark and his ice-cold team, took a very personal interest in the case of a wannabe vigilante threatening a national defense asset with an unlicensed weapon. It turned out the federal government doesn't take kindly to someone threatening one of their trainers, especially not on their watch. They didn't need to charge Barry with federal crimes. They just let the local district attorney know in clear, unmistakable terms that they'd be watching the case with great interest. It was the legal equivalent of painting a bullseye on his back. And then, Sarah's data bomb went off. My cousin, an attorney with a mean streak and a gift for paperwork, was practically giddy. She compiled a comprehensive dossier and sent it straight to the state's private security licensing board. It included Sarah's forensic audit of the HOA's contract with Barracuda Security, indisputable evidence that the company was operating well beyond the scope of their unarmed license, and a sworn affidavit from me describing the armed stakeouts. Within a week, Barracuda's license was suspended, pending full investigation. The state levied fines that made my jaw drop. Barry's little tin pot dictatorship didn't just collapse, it vaporized. And then came the emergency home meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, sterile room that usually hosted potlucks and book clubs, but that night, it felt more like a tribunal. A packed house, people standing against the walls, the air thick with anger and betrayal. Sarah was at my side. Old man Hemlock sat beside me like a proud war vet watching the next generation win their own battle. At the board table sat Carol, our insider, no longer timid, but resolute. Barry's brother-in-law, the HOA president, tried to open with procedural filler. He didn't get 2 sentences in before he was drowned out by booze. Carol stood. Her voice was clear, steady. She laid it all out: the inflated fees, the no-bid contract handed to a sketchy, uninsured outfit run by the president's own family. She presented Sarah's financial breakdown, showing that the so-called crime wave was fiction, nothing but smoke used to hike fees and justify armed patrols. You could feel the shift in the room. People looked ready to storm the Bastille with pitchforks made of artisan driftwood. Then I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I just told the story. The harassment, the drone, the confrontation that ended with my son at gunpoint. I reminded them that thanks to their HOA's negligence, the entire neighborhood now faced legal exposure so massive it could bankrupt every homeowner. The room went silent. Barry's brother-in-law, and the 2 remaining board members who'd enabled him, sat under 100 blistering stares. They withered. Then, quietly, one after the other, they resigned. But that wasn't the end. That would have been too easy. My cousina, sensing blood in the water, had come prepared. She pulled out a folder thick with signatures and liability exhibits. And after the meeting, residents lined up, one by one, to join a class action lawsuit. The suit accused the now defunct board and the property management company of gross negligence, endangerment, and financial misconduct. When the HOA's insurance carrier got wind of the felony charges and the lawsuit, they dropped Whispering Pines faster than a live grenade. The HOA was finished. Checkmate. Weeks later, a judge dissolved the Whispering Pines HOA entirely. A court-appointed receiver was installed, tasked only with keeping the lights on and maintaining shared spaces, mowing the grass. All the restrictive rules gone. The no trucks policy, the mailbox dimensions, the hand-painted sign regulations, all null and void. The first casualty was the giant, faux rustic "Welcome to Whispering Pines" sign at the neighborhood entrance. Someone took a chainsaw to it. I like to think it was Old Man Hemlock. One cool evening, I stood at the edge of my driveway. The air was still. Crickets chirped. I had a hammer, a bucket of nails, and my dad's old Signa, the one that had marked our property for 30 years before Barry and his cronies took it down. I was putting it back up. My phone rang. It was Jake, calling from some base, somewhere far away and dusty. "So," he said, his voice crackling faintly, "did you get my postcard?" A package had arrived that morning. Inside, a framed photo of a shooting range target. In the center, a printed picture of a clipboard shredded with bullet holes. I laughed. The sound carried in the still twilight. "Got it?" I said. "It's going up in the workshop." "Good," he replied. "So broken bar did you